In the rugged frontier of Montana, a desperate mail-order bride named Eleanor arrives clutching nothing but a satchel and a fragile hope. But when she's brutally rejected by the wealthy rancher who summoned her, her dreams shatter in humiliation. Alone and destitute, Eleanor finds refuge in the barn of a neighboring rancher named Nathan, a man haunted by a past betrayal. Yet from the depths of despair blooms an unexpected bond, forging a love powerful enough to defy scandal and fight injustice. But when dark secrets and ruthless schemes threaten to tear them apart, Eleanor and Nathan must choose whether their love can withstand society's judgment and hidden dangers. To discover the fate of their remarkable journey, stay with us to the very end. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. Your support helps bring more incredible stories like this to life. The stagecoach squeaked and lurched to a standstill, unleashing a swirl of dust that glowed gold in the late afternoon sun of the Wyoming Territory. Adeline Price pressed her palms against the worn sides of her small trunk, her entire life contained in that scuffed leather case, and carefully stepped down onto the unpaved main street of Riverbend. It was a raw, unsettled town in the heart of Cottonwood Hollow, where ragged buildings were separated by stretches of dirt stables and hitching posts. The sight sent her heart clattering with both excitement and dread. She had come here clutching hope like a lifeline, praying this decision would offer escape from the closed doors of Boston and the bruises left by poverty. Her journey had been grueling 6 days of unsteady travel, cramped quarters and harsh nights filled with rattles and chill. Her gray dress, modest but meticulously mended, hung heavily on her slender frame. She had done her best to present herself as respectable, despite the wrinkles and dust clinging to every thread. When the driver hopped down and announced with a booming voice that they'd reached Riverbend, she had felt a surge of terror mixed with relief. This place was to be her new beginning, or so she had believed when she first started writing letters to Harvey Miller, the cattleman who promised marriage and a fresh start. Adeline had never met Harvey. For 4 months they had exchanged letters, warm, earnest words that offered a vision of an open sky and wide rolling fields, the promise of a partner who needed a bride of gentle disposition to assist on a working homestead. She had clung to that correspondence every night at the boarding house in Boston, where her rent was quickly becoming too steep and her future too clouded. The final letter he'd sent confirmed an invitation. She should arrive any time after May, he'd said. Now it was June, and here she stood alone in a town she knew solely by name. On the street, a wiry man in a torn waistcoat sidestepped her trunk and offered a small nod. Further along, an older woman in a bonnet eyed Adeline with something between curiosity and pity. Riverbend had one saloon with a crooked sign that read, Leslie's Place, a cramped church leaning precariously to one side, a general store with barrels out front, and a row of plain wooden buildings. Adeline looked around trying to spot Harvey Miller. He had mentioned being of medium-height brown hair and a well-trimmed beard, typical enough that she could not immediately identify him in the scattered knots of men moving about. She lifted a hand to shield her eyes from the sun, scanning for someone who might recognize her. A curious boy of around 12 approached, twisting a piece of straw between his lips. "Ma'am, you look like you're waiting for somebody," he said with the too bold manner of a child who'd grown up on the frontier. "Yes," she replied, trying to calm the flutter in her stomach. "I'm supposed to meet Mr. Harvey Miller. Do you happen to know him?" The boy's eyes widened and he nodded before pointing toward a store across the way. "That's him there, coming out with a box under his arm." Adeline followed the boy's pointing finger and spotted a man stepping onto the boardwalk. Her heart jerked in her chest as she recognized the neatly trimmed beard and tidy attire. This was the man she had bet her life upon. Pushing down a tremor of nerves, Adeline lifted her trunk by its thin handle and mustered her courage. She walked across the rutted street, dust clinging to her hems. The man stood outside the mercantile, the broad brim of his hat shading his face. She hesitated only a moment, then approached him directly. "Mr. Miller." Her voice felt small, but it didn't waver. Harvey Miller gave her a puzzled glance, then blinked with sudden recognition. "Miss Price," he said slowly as though her name were caught in his throat. Adeline forced a smile. "I received your final letter. You invited me to come, so I've arrived," she explained, her heart pounding. Instantly, she sensed something was off. His posture grew rigid and a shadow crossed his face. He didn't look at all like the man who had ended his letters with gentle words and bright visions of a shared future. "I see," he muttered, shooting an uneasy glance around. "I didn't anticipate you'd arrive so soon, but it's already June," she answered politely. "Your last letter said any time after May would be suitable." Harvey's gaze flickered to the trunk, his brow tightening when he noticed how little she carried. "That's all your luggage?" he asked. Feeling the sting in his question, Adeline swallowed. "I brought only what I could afford to bring," she admitted. His response was a slow, cold appraisal of her. In that moment, Adeline felt it slipping away, the bright, hopeful vision of a loving fiancé. The space between them seemed to fill with regret and embarrassment. "We should talk somewhere quieter," he said, leading her to a small cafe beside the Riverbend Hotel. They sat at a small table in the dim interior, the hush of mid-afternoon enveloping them. When a waitress approached, Harvey ordered 2 coffees, though Adeline suspected neither of them had much appetite for it. He laced his fingers together on the table. "Miss Price, I fear there's been a misunderstanding," he started, voice low. Her blood ran cold. "What sort of misunderstanding, Mr. Miller?" He wouldn't meet her eyes. "In your letters, you said you had a modest position and a bit of skill at sewing." He began. "I interpreted that to mean you had enough funds to, well, that you could bring something tangible to the marriage." "It seems you have nothing." Adeline stared at him, too stunned for words. A flicker of shame flashed on his face, but it hardened into self-protection. "I've spent years expanding my homestead, Miss Price. It's beginning to thrive, but I need a wife who can bring capital, someone who can help me invest. You see, I hope for a woman with a decent dowry or some stable resources to add to my ranch, with just a trunk and the clothes on your back." He let the words hang in the air. Pain flared inside her. "So my character, my work ethic, those mean nothing?" she asked, forcing her voice not to shake. "Skills can be hired, Miss Price." Harvey countered bluntly. "Support from a partner is another matter. I must think practically." When Adeline realized the weight of his dismissal, her vision blurred. She had braced for culture shock, for homesickness, even for the possibility that he might be less kind in person, but not for open contempt. Yet as she glanced around, she saw the curious eyes of a few townspeople drifting their way. Harvey was clearly eager to avoid a scene. He lowered his voice. "I'll give you enough money to take the next stage back east. Miss Price, let's just end this quietly." Adeline felt the impact of his words like a physical blow. What would she return to in Boston? Her job at the factory was gone. She had sold her furniture to make this journey. "You made promises, Mr. Miller," she whispered. "If I did, they weren't unconditional," he replied. "I won't be made a fool of in front of Riverbend." Her cheeks burned with humiliation. She pushed her coffee cup aside, got to her feet, and reached for her trunk's handle with trembling fingers. "I won't trouble you," she said, her voice hollow. The sting of tears threatened, but she refused to cry. She walked into the hot sun, her ears buzzing with the low murmurs of patrons, who now knew precisely how little she was wanted. She kept walking until she was out of the cafe, out of the tight circle of scrutiny, and back into the brunt of an unforgiving afternoon. Staggering with shock, Adeline made her way toward the edge of town. Her savings amounted to just a few coins, certainly not enough to buy a return ticket. The dusty street led on, but she had nowhere to go. Each hoofbeat and wagon wheel that passed behind her felt like an echo of retreat. She tasted bitterness at the back of her throat. In one callous afternoon, she had been stripped of both illusions and security. She finally stopped at a sun-scorched patch of ground near a shallow creek. As she stood there, sweat trickling beneath her collar, clouds gathered in the west and the wind shifted from hot to ominous. A thunderstorm was rolling in, a fitting symbol, she thought, of her disastrous day. When thunder boomed, it felt like a warning drumbeat. She spotted a wagon trundling past, and the driver gave her a curious glance, but didn't stop to offer help. Folks out here had their own concerns, and a woman alone wasn't always guaranteed sympathy. Raindrops as large as pebbles began to pelt the earth, sending up puffs of dust that quickly turned to mud. Adeline hunched over her trunk, trying to protect what little she owned. Lightning splintered the sky. She glanced around in desperation. About half a mile away, she saw a building, a barn she guessed sitting among rolling fields. It was her only hope of shelter. Gathering the remains of her dignity, She grabbed her trunk and trudged through the rain, swept meadow boots, sloshing through puddles. Each lightning flash illuminated the horizon, showing a modest ranch house behind the barn. Smoke curled from its chimney, despite the season suggesting someone was inside. By the time she reached the barn door, her clothes were sodden hair plastered to her skull. Her arms ached from dragging the trunk across the ever-slicker ground. The barn itself loomed wooden slats hammered together in a functional but well-kept fashion. She knocked, but her knock went unanswered, muffled by rolling thunder. Summoning her last bit of strength, she unlatched the door and stepped inside. The sense of hay and horse sweat enveloped her earthier and kinder than the unrelenting storm. With no one to greet her, Adeline slipped to her knees beside a stack of feed sacks, setting her trunk down with care. Her breath came in ragged gasps as she tried to gather her composure. For a few minutes, she just listened to the angry hammer of rain on the roof, water rushing in miniature rivers outside. Then her exhaustion claimed her, and she dozed off, her cheek pillowed, on a warm, straw-strewn surface. Despite her humiliation and fear, she felt safer here, hidden away from the stares of townsfolk who had witnessed Harvey's rejection. Outside, thunder grumbled and the rain's volume ebbed and flowed. But at least for this short while, she had a roof above her head. She awoke to the sound of a soft voice near her ear. Miss, are you all right?" Blinking the heaviness from her eyes, she sat up and found herself looking into the concerned face of a man, maybe in his mid-30s, broad-shouldered, wearing a work shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows. His dark hair had faint hints of gray along the temples, and a short, neat beard framed a strong jaw. He clutched a lantern that cast jittery yellow light across the barn walls. Adeline scrambled up, trying to reclaim some dignity. "I'm sorry," she murmured. "I took shelter from the storm. I hope no one would mind." The man waved off her apology. "I'm Samuel Caldwell, owner of this land. My ranch hand heard noises, so I came to check." He studied her drenched clothes and the trunk at her side. "You look half frozen. Come inside the house. The rain's eased, but you won't want to sleep out here." Adeline clutched her trunk's handle, unsure if it was wise to trust yet another stranger. But her predicament offered no better alternatives. "I appreciate your kindness, Mr. Caldwell." He led her out into the damp night. The storm clouds were drifting north now, leaving behind a cleared sky studded with stars. As they walked the short distance to the modest ranch house, a swirl of cool wind wrapped around them, the scent of rain-soaked fields filling her lungs. A soft light glowed from a window. The house itself was simple but sturdy, built of logs with a porch that overlooked a corral. Inside, the warmth of a smoldering fire embraced them. The main room had a few armchairs, a table and a shelf lined with books. A pot of stew simmered over the hearth, its aroma making her stomach clench with hunger. "Sit by the fire," he offered, moving to hang the lantern. "Let me see if I can find something dry you can change into." She perched on a chair, arms wrapped around her body, trying to quell her shivers. A minute later, Samuel returned with an armful of folded garments, a plain nightgown, a robe, and thick socks. "My younger sister Josie stayed here for a time." He explained, his voice gentler than she had expected. "She left some clothes behind." Adeline accepted the items, touched by the gesture. "Thank you, Mr. Caldwell. Truly." He showed her to a spare bedroom at the back of the house, a small but clean space with a washstand and a single bed covered in a colorful quilt. Adeline changed out of her sodden dress, grateful for the dryness of the borrowed clothing. The plushness of the quilt and the faint smell of soap on the nightgown made her feel for the first time that day human again. She splashed her face and hands with water from the basin, then ventured back into the main room. She found Samuel ladling stew into 2 bowls. He beckoned her to the table, where mugs of steaming coffee waited. When she sat, her entire body trembled with a mix of nerves and hunger. "Eat," he said, pushing the bowl gently toward her. "If you don't, you'll pass out." Indeed, the stew was a welcome comfort, chunks of beef and potato laced with herbs. She took each spoonful, slowly conscious of her manners, even though her stomach growled in protest. They ate in near silence, both evidently unsure how to navigate the sudden intimacy of sharing a meal late at night. But once Adeline's bowl was half empty, Samuel cleared his throat. "You're a long way from Riverbend to be out on foot. Mind telling me how you ended up soaked and alone?" She chose her words carefully, wanting to be truthful, without broadcasting her humiliation. I arrived in Riverbend earlier today, she began. I answered an advertisement for a bride. Well, it didn't work out. So I left hoping to figure out my next step. Samuel's eyebrows rose a fraction. Ah, he said, understanding flickering across his face. I heard rumors around town that Harvey Miller was expecting someone. That was me, she admitted, voice taut. He decided I wasn't suitable. She found it impossible to hide the bitterness creeping in. Samuel offered a rueful half-smile. Miller's always been more concerned about turning a profit than anything else. This territory is tough, but it's even tougher for those who measure everything by gold dust and coin. Then he took a careful sip of coffee, as if weighing how much more to ask. So what will you do? He finally said. I'm not entirely sure. Adeline confessed I have almost no money and no place to stay. I've been a seamstress, a bookkeeper, a general helper, but I don't think Mr. Miller left me with any local prospects. Setting aside his empty bowl, Samuel leaned forward. I need help here, he said plainly. This ranch is more than I can handle alone. There's cooking, cleaning, a vegetable garden that's half choked with weeds, and my accounts need organizing. I can't promise high wages, but I can offer you a roof meals and a small sum in return for honest work until you decide your next move. Adeline blinked, surprised by his abrupt generosity. You'd hire me, even knowing you might face gossip, Samuel shrugged. I know small-town rumors well enough, and I won't turn someone away who's done no wrong. If you're willing to help, the job's yours. It felt like a lifeline. She considered the risk of staying under the same roof as an unmarried man, the scandal it could spark. But what were her options? She had no stage fare, no job waiting in any other city. Taking a measured breath, she answered, I'm willing. On one condition, Samuel's brow creased. Condition that I'm not accepting charity. She said, I want to work, earn my keep. A brief smile tugged at his lips. Agreed, he stood and stretched, weariness carved into his features. We can finalize details in the morning. For now, get some rest, Miss Price. The bedroom's yours for the duration, as long as you want it. She nodded unexpectedly, touched by the respect he showed in offering her space and choice. Thank you, Mr. Caldwell, she murmured. You've shown me a kindness I never saw coming. He paused at the threshold of the spare room, shoulders tense in the lamplight. Most folks out here know what it's like to stand at a crossroads. I'm no different. After a moment, he added, Good night, Miss Price, and closed the door softly behind him. Adeline adjusted to life on the Caldwell Ranch far more smoothly than she would have believed possible. Each day began at sunrise. She woke early to stoke the kitchen stove, brew coffee, and prepare a simple breakfast for Samuel and herself. He'd come in from morning chores, wash up, and join her at the table for eggs or warm biscuits. She found comfort in the routine, each task allowing her to forget the humiliation that had brought her here. By mid-afternoon, she devoted herself to cleaning every inch of the ranch house. It lacked a woman's touch, though it was neat enough in a bachelor's way. Old dust-coated shelves lined with books about cattle breeding, irrigation, and the history of the territory. She discovered an abandoned sewing basket containing partially mended clothes. Here and there, she spotted signs that a young woman had once lived under this roof. Likely Josie, the sister whose dresses had become Adeline's temporary wardrobe. One corner of the living room held a small writing desk with a broken hinge, which she resolved to fix. Evenings were punctuated by the arrival of two ranch hands, Rupert and Tobias, who came to share supper. Rupert older and more guarded-eyed Adeline, as if she were an intruder, at first clearly unsure whether she'd burden the ranch or lighten Samuel's workload. Tobias, younger by several years, proved to be talkative, entertaining her with tales of roundups and the occasional coyote threat. Gradually, even Rupert thawed when Adeline began fixing hearty stews and breads that reminded him of his mother's cooking. The ranch hands started to relax around her presence, and she in turn felt less like a stranger. One late afternoon, while Adeline was kneeling in the patch of soil that passed for a kitchen garden, pulling out stubborn weeds and checking the dryness, Samuel approached his steps, quiet in the thick grass. I see the garden is in better shape already, he remarked, a note of pride in his voice. Adeline straightened and wiped sweat from her forehead. There are plenty of rocks and roots, but the soil's still got life. Another week or two, I can plant some new seeds. He nodded, a faint smile curving his lips. I'm grateful. You've done more in a few days than I managed in months. She tried not to let the warmth in his gaze fluster her. I'm just glad to make myself useful, she said, turning back to the garden to hide her small smile. But the illusions of peace shattered the following morning when Harvey Miller showed up in the ranch yard with three companions, one wearing a deputy's badge. Adeline had been hanging laundry to dry the crisp morning air, so different from the muggy East Coast climate she grew up with. She felt her pulse spike the moment she recognized Harvey's rigid stance. He no longer bothered hiding contempt beneath politeness. Rupert and Tobias stepped out from the barn flanking Samuel, who stood near the corral with his arms crossed. Adeline hovered at the edge of the porch, trying not to let her heart trip over itself. Harvey dismounted, removing his hat in a mocking gesture. Caldwell, he drawled, gaze slanting to Adeline Word. In Riverbend says you've installed yourself a housekeeper. His eyes flickered with disdain. And one with a questionable background. Samuel's jaw tightened. She is my employee, he replied, keeping his voice steady. State your business. Miller Harvey shrugged, glancing at the deputy who looked painfully young and uncertain. I'm making sure Miss Price here is, well, it's unusual for a single woman to be living on a ranch with a bachelor. Rupert exchanged a glance with Tobias, both men shifting in agitation. Before anyone else could respond, Adeline stepped forward, refusing to let Harvey snipe at her from a distance. I'm quite well, Mr. Miller, thanks to Samuel's kindness, she said clearly. And I've no complaints about my work or living arrangements. Harvey's lips formed a tight line. Is that so? Well, you might be interested to know that I've had business in town with certain officials. They're about to reopen an old matter concerning property lines and water rights. Seems your employer here has been dabbling in claims left behind by Old Man Whitaker, claims that might be invalid if undue influence is proven. A ripple of anger spread across Samuel's face. You don't know what you're talking about. Harvey gave an insincere chuckle. I know enough. I know Whitaker left this land to you under questionable circumstances, and I know you took advantage of him in his final days. Word is, you might be taking advantage of Miss Price too. The final comment stung Adeline, but she kept her stance firm. The deputy fiddled with his hat, looking uncomfortable. Sir, do we really need to? Quiet, Hayes, Harvey snapped. Shutting him down, Samuel took a step closer, fists clenched. Get off my property, Miller, and stop spreading lies. Instead of leaving, Harvey looked at Adeline. Better watch your back. Miss Price. This man is known for his temper, and if you keep living under his roof, you'll only worsen his reputation. Adeline's anger flared. The only reputation at risk here is yours, Mr. Miller, for casting aside your bride, because she wasn't wealthy enough to buy your land expansions. The bold remark made Rupert cough to hide a laugh. Tobias grinned outright. Harvey's face darkened, but he smoothed it away with a veneer of mock civility. I'd tread carefully if I were you, he said, turning to mount his horse. This is just the beginning. Riverbend's council meets next Tuesday. A few key voices will surely have a say on Caldwell's water claims. We'll see which side the law takes. With that, he and his companions rode off. The tension left behind felt thick enough to cut with a knife. Samuel exhaled and turned every muscle taut. Adeline approached him, ignoring the eyes of Rupert and Tobias. You all right? She asked quietly. He gave a curt nod, though his gaze burned with frustration. This is precisely the kind of trouble I worried he'd bring, he muttered. Whitaker was an old friend. He left me that portion of land because he refused to sell to Harvey. But it's within Harvey's power to cast doubt on the will. Rupert piped up. He can threaten and slander all he wants. We know the truth. Tobias nodded, though he looked uneasy. Riverbend's a small place. Rumors fly fast? Samuel shot them a grateful glance, then turned back to Adeline. Miller is using you as bait, claiming impropriety. I can't let you get dragged into this. She squared her shoulders. He already dragged me in the moment he rejected me so publicly. Besides, I won't run from him again. She saw something flicker in Samuel's eyes, respect perhaps. At least consider what it might mean. He said softly, I don't want you suffering because of my feud with Miller. Adeline took a breath, letting the morning sun and the fresh breeze refocus her thoughts. I'm staying until I decide otherwise. Mr. Caldwell, Harvey. Miller doesn't get to define my future? At that, Rupert politely cleared his throat. Tobias and I have fence repairs. We'll let you two talk. The ranch hands departed, leaving Adeline and Samuel alone in the hush. In the days that followed, Adeline settled deeper into her role, partly to keep her mind off the mounting tensions with Harvey and the council meeting that loomed early one morning. She was scrubbing the kitchen floor when there was a knock on the door. She stood drying her hands and found a woman with silver hair in a tight bun, her expression guarded but curious. Beatrice Patterson. The woman introduced herself bluntly. I do washing and mending for the Caldwell place sometimes. Adeline nodded, stepping aside to let her in. I'm Adeline Price. Yes, the unfortunate woman from Boston. Beatrice set her gaze roving over Adeline's plain dress. Heard you got cast aside by Harvey Miller. Town gossip runs on that talk, like steam in a boiler. Adeline stiffened. It's not quite so simple, Beatrice huffed, setting down a bundle of fresh linens. Never is, but I've known Samuel Caldwell since he was knee-high. If you're living under his roof, folks will have things to say. Adeline didn't flinch from the warning. I'm here to work, Mrs. Patterson, not to feed gossip. Mr. Caldwell gave me employment when there was no other choice. Beatrice considered her for a moment, then nodded once. Fair enough, I'll leave these here. If you've clothing for me to launder, put it in the basket by tomorrow. Adeline returned to her, scrubbing, unsettled by the blunt way everyone seemed to talk about her future. She guessed it came from years of hardship on the frontier, where people had no time or patience for sugarcoating. By the end of the week, the garden was clearing nicely, and the house felt more orderly. One quiet evening, Adeline and Samuel sat on the porch, listening to the last calls of meadowlarks while the sun dipped behind distant hills. I appreciate all you've done, he said quietly, resting his elbows on his knees. It's amazing how much can change in just a week. I've never seen this place so cared for. A shy smile touched her lips. It's your ranch. I'm just helping keep it in shape. Any woman with housekeeping experience could do the same. He turned his gaze flicking across her face. It's more than that. You've become part of the ranch. Rupert and Tobias trust you. Even my sister's old mare seems to like you. She usually hates strangers. Adeline chuckled softly. I've discovered that a gentle approach works best whether it's gardens or animals. But you've been good to me, Samuel. I could never repay that. The corners of his mouth twitched. I'm no Saint Adeline. I needed help just as much as you needed a place to land. Maybe this arrangement is just mutual aid. Before Adeline could respond, the dull thud of hooves drew their attention. In the dusky light, a single rider approached. Samuel stood tension creeping into his shoulders, but it wasn't Harvey Miller. It was a young deputy, Hayes, the same one who had accompanied Harvey days before. He removed his hat respectfully. Mr. Caldwell, Miss Price, he said, nodding. Sorry to bother you, I wanted to pass word. The council meets in 3 days, Mr. Miller's requested a formal hearing to dispute water claims and mention improprieties. Adeline's stomach twisted at that final word. Samuel's jaw worked, I see. Thank you for letting me know, the deputy exhaled as though relieved. I don't think it's fair personally, but Miller is well connected. You both might want to prepare. Then almost as an afterthought, he added, if you need anything from me, I'll help if I can. My pa had a lot of respect for old man Whitaker, and I'm not convinced by these rumors. After Hayes departed, Adeline found she was shaking. Anger, dread, and vulnerability mingled like a brew inside her. Samuel wrapped a cautious arm around her shoulders, guiding her back onto the porch. It'll be fine, he said, though his own voice was tense. She leaned against him just a fraction, inhaling the faint scent of soap and wood smoke on his shirt. I'm sorry, she said, for the trouble I've caused. He shook his head, expression resolute. No, this trouble would have found me regardless. Harvey's been circling like a vulture for ages. At least now I've got someone standing beside me. A quiver ran through her at the tenderness in his statement. Had they really become allies in such a short time? She felt the steady thrum of his heartbeat under her cheek as the last rays of sunlight sank behind the hills. The months before, she had spent every waking moment running from foreclosures and factory closures, pressed into a corner until she answered an ad for a mail-order bride. That dream had shattered, and yet here, on a run-down ranch under a wide western sky, she'd found an unexpected sense of belonging. Below this line is the continuation to meet the user's at least 4,000 words requirement. The story continues seamlessly with the same style and additional paragraphs, also within the 450-600 word range. 2 days before the council, hearing a fresh complication arrived in the form of a dark-haired woman stepping down from a stagecoach in Riverbend. Her name was Josie Caldwell, as Adeline soon learned, and it turned out she was Samuel's half-sister. She'd been gone for 2 years living in Cheyenne with an aunt. Word reached Adeline through Rupert, who said Josie had come unexpectedly determined to warn Samuel about Harvey Miller's escalating tactics. Josie arrived at the ranch in a hired buggy late in the afternoon, her posture stiff, her expression riddled with the tension of someone returning to a place filled with old ghosts. Samuel met her by the corral, hugging her with a mix of brotherly relief and confusion. Adeline stood on the porch wanting to be respectful of their reunion, but also aware that Josie's return probably signaled a new wave of chaos. After a murmured conversation, they both headed toward the house. Josie's eyes swept the yard, landing on Adeline with open curiosity. Inside, over hastily prepared coffee, Adeline sat with them around the kitchen table. "I'm Josie," his sister said, tapping her fingers on the tabletop. "And you must be the seamstress who took over my old room." There was a teasing note, but also a hint of wariness. Adeline dipped her head. "Adeline Price. I hope you don't mind me borrowing a few dresses that Samuel said were yours. He insisted, actually. So Josie waved it off. I left in a rush. Wasn't exactly tidy about it. I'm glad they're being put to use." Samuel cleared his throat. "What's this about a warning? Josie, Rupert said you're worried about Miller's next moves?" His sister sighed and produced a crumpled letter from her bag. "I have sources in Cheyenne. Apparently Harvey's been bragging that he's about to ruin your ranch. He also told a few people that you're harboring a fallen woman." She shifted her gaze toward Adeline. "No offense intended." The words stung, but Adeline tried to remain stoic. "He'll say anything to bend public opinion." Josie's nod was grim. "He nearly destroyed my reputation, too. When I was 17, I was naive enough to believe his charming ways. After I left, he spread rumors that I was pregnant with his child or that I'd run away with stolen money. All lies, of course, but it was enough to turn half the town against me. He's vicious when crossed." A hush fell. Samuel reached over, covering Josie's hand with his own. "You should have told me about this earlier. I'd have gone after him." She squeezed his fingers. "I couldn't face it then. But I'm here now to warn you. Harvey's determined to see you crash and burn Sam. And Miss Price, he'll use her as ammunition. Let him try." Adeline said, her voice quiet but firm. "I'm done letting him push me around." Josie studied her with open interest. "So you're not just some timid bride from back east?" Adeline felt her spine straighten. "I was desperate when I answered his ad, but I'm not helpless, and I refuse to give him the satisfaction of seeing me crawl away." An unexpected smile tugged at Josie's lips. "Good," she said softly. "You'll need that fire." That evening, the four of them, Samuel, Josie, Rupert, Tobias, and Adeline, gathered outside the barn under a wide sky riddled with stars. It was a habit now, sharing a meal on the porch or around a small fire pit. Josie insisted on hearing every detail about the water claim dispute, how Old Man Whitaker had willed the land to Samuel instead of Harvey, and how Harvey had resurrected an ancient rumor that Samuel coerced the dying man. "I remember Whitaker," Josie said, stirring the embers of the fire with a stick. "He was stubborn, but he loved Sam like a son." Samuel nodded. "He had no surviving family. I never asked for his land, but he said he'd rather I care for it than let Harvey turn it into a show ranch for bragging rights. Miller just can't stand that Whitaker gave it to me willingly." Tobias poked at the Dutch oven they used for cooking. "Even if the council sides with him, I can't see them just revoking your rights." "You've worked that land for years," Josie's mouth twisted. "You'd be surprised how easily decisions sway when you have men in your pocket. Harvey pays for new signage in town, buys drinks at the saloon, and finances half of Riverbend's improvements. That kind of influence runs deep." Rupert nodded gloomily. He's got the mayor's ear, too. Been promising to bring in bigger cattle sales if they pass new regulations. Adeline felt a hollow pit in her stomach. So he basically wants to starve out Samuel's ranch if we don't comply. Nobody contradicted that Adeline studied the fire. Well, let him do his worst. I survived losing a job when a factory closed, sitting in a cramped boarding house with no light and no heat-scraping pennies to eat. I can handle a pompous man with more money than decency. Her words sparked a faint smile on Samuel's face. You've grown bold, Miss Price, he said quietly. She shrugged. I've realized there's no use cowering. Silence fell, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was more like a unified resolution. Later, as everyone retired for the night, Josie insisted she'd sleep in the small storage room, allowing Adeline to keep what had been her old bedroom. Adeline felt a little awkward about it, but Josie waved off the concern. I won't be here long. Once the council meeting is over, I might head back. My life's in Cheyenne now. I came because I had to see Sam safe. Adeline squeezed her hand in gratitude, though she could sense complex emotions swirling behind Josie's eyes. When Adeline slipped off to bed, she found Samuel outside in the hallway, as if waiting to speak with her alone. Listen, he began, voice thick with hesitation. I know we've only known each other a short time, but... He struggled to find the right words. If things get ugly at the hearing, and you'd rather not be part of the spectacle, I'd understand if you leave. I'd even pay your stage fare. No questions asked. A pang rippled through her. She rested a hand on his arm. I don't want to leave. She said, I came here with nothing, but I found a reason to stay, at least for now. She didn't specify whether the reason was him, though the unspoken meaning sparked in both their eyes. He let out a breath. All right then, we'll face it together. In that moment, she felt the faint promise of something more than mutual aid, but the weight of the next day's council meeting pressed too heavily on them for hopes to fully blossom. Adeline retreated to bed, her thoughts spinning with both dread and determination. The morning of the council meeting dawned hot and still. The sky a fierce blue without a single cloud. Adeline dressed carefully in one of Josie's older yet respectable dresses, adjusting it so it fit snug at the waist. She told herself it mattered how she appeared, that it might help diminish the whispers of scandal and impropriety. When she emerged from her room, Samuel was already harnessing the wagon outside, wearing his best trousers, and a crisp shirt rolled at the sleeves. Josie accompanied them, as she had letters and notes she claimed might be useful. Rupert and Tobias stayed behind to mind the ranch. Adeline's heart pounded the entire trip into Riverbend, recalling how she'd been tossed aside in front of a cafe not so long ago. Yet she forced herself to ride, tall eyes fixed on the dusty main street. Riverbend was more crowded than usual, folks gathering near the weather-beaten council building, which doubled as a makeshift courthouse. Inside, the council meeting was already underway. A handful of town elders seated behind a long table. Harvey Miller stood near the front with his lawyer, a slick man in a tailored suit who cast condescending glances at Samuel and Adeline. She fought the urge to recoil. At the back of the room, she spotted Deputy Hayes, arms folded, looking anxious. The first order of business ironically had nothing to do with them. The council spent a half-hour arguing over a new stables tax. Adeline felt each tick of the clock as if it were a hammer to her nerves. Finally, one of the elders cleared his throat. Next matter, dispute over water claims in the Whitaker territory brought forth by Mr. Miller. Also includes concerns about moral conduct raised in the public forum. An immediate murmur swept through the onlookers. Adeline saw men nudging each other, women leaning in hungry for gossip. Harvey began with a polished speech about how old man Whitaker had been manipulated by Samuel, about how the will was suspicious and how the character of Caldwell was in question. He gestured to Adeline in a way that made her skin crawl. This housekeeper so-called arrived under the pretense of marrying me, he stated, voice carefully pitched only to go directly to Caldwell's ranch when I declined. What does that suggest about Mr. Caldwell's morals and his willingness to coerce vulnerable people for his own gain? Josie's hand tightened around Adeline's. She whispered, he's twisting it all. Adeline felt her cheeks flush, hearing how the crowd responded, some with gasps, others with uncertain frowns. Harvey ended his statement with a flourish, proclaiming that the water rights should revert to him for the good of Riverbend, as he had the means to expand and bring greater wealth to the region. When the council invited Samuel to speak, he stood tall, explaining calmly how Whitaker had been a mentor and friend, how the land had been willed freely. He acknowledged that Adeline was indeed once Harvey's intended, but insisted her reasons for leaving were entirely about Harvey's own rejection based on financial demands. She found shelter on my ranch, and she does honest work, Samuel said, glancing at Adeline. There's no wrongdoing. No scandal, except that some men refuse to see a woman's worth beyond her purse. Harvey's lawyer then tried to undermine Samuel's story. We have a statement here from Charles Hayes Sr. claiming Whitaker once told him Caldwell was pressuring him. Adeline felt her stomach clench recalling that rumor. But just as the lawyer began reading it, Josie stood. I have documentation too, she announced. The council members exchanged startled looks as Josie approached their table. She placed a thick stack of papers down, each bearing an official seal or notation. While living in Cheyenne, I worked under an attorney who tracked Harvey Miller's business dealings. She explained, her voice ringing through the hush. We gathered evidence that Mr. Miller coerced other property owners with intimidation and false promises, sometimes forging signatures on land transfer documents. A jolt ran through the room. Harvey's face paled and his lawyer sputtered. That's absurd. Completely unsubstantiated, Josie smiled tightly. The seals you see on these documents belong to the territorial court. Each paper cross-references a transaction in which Miller's name surfaces with questionable details. There's an ongoing investigation that may lead to formal charges. Harvey tried to interrupt, but she pressed on. As for moral concerns, your so-called impropriety argument is a distraction from your own wrongdoing. An uproar started among the spectators. The mayor struggled to restore order, banging a gavel. Adeline's heart thundered. She dared to glance at Samuel. His eyes were fixed on his sister with gratitude and pride. Harvey Miller, meanwhile, seemed genuinely rattled, though he managed to sneer. This doesn't change that Caldwell took advantage of old man Whitaker, he snapped. Where is your proof that the will was legitimate? At that, Deputy Hayes stepped forward from the back. Judge Winters oversaw the will signing. Mr. Miller, he stated, voice resolute. I can confirm Whitaker was in his right mind. I was there delivering a message for my father. There was no duress. Adeline watched the color drain from Harvey's face. He shot the deputy a look of betrayal. You kept that quiet, he hissed. Hayes shrugged. Didn't see a need to speak up until you dragged me and my father's memory into your scheme. A ripple of tension passed, and the council conferred amongst themselves. The man with the gavel finally spoke. Given the new evidence of Mr. Miller's questionable dealings and the testimony supporting Whitaker's will, we see no reason to invalidate Caldwell's claim. Furthermore, we recommend investigating the matter of forging signatures under the territorial court's authority. Noise erupted, gasps, chatter half the audience, craning to see Harvey's reaction. Harvey's lawyer tried to salvage the situation. This hearing is not about investigations into my client, but the mayor cut him off. Maybe not, but the statements submitted by Miss Caldwell are enough for us to suspend any further action on your petition. Mr. Miller, the hearing is concluded. Harvey stood there, fists trembling, face contorted with fury. His eyes swept over Adeline, Josie, and Samuel with a venomous glare. But there was nothing he could do. The crowd began to disperse. Some folks looked displeased to see their local power player humiliated. Others seemed relieved. Adeline's knees felt wobbly. She turned to Samuel and he caught her hands in his. You did nothing but stand there, he murmured, and yet you faced him down. I'm proud of you, she gave a small, trembling laugh. I'm proud of us all, Josie joined them, her documents tucked securely in a satchel. He won't go down easily. Sam, she warned, though a smile hovered on her lips. But at least you've won this round. Miller's hold is weakening, Adeline exhaled. So, is it over? Samuel's gaze traveled over the thinning crowd to where Harvey disappeared into the street. Not entirely, but it's a damn good start. Over the next week, Riverbend buzzed with the fallout of Harvey Miller's council defeat. Rumors flew about impending charges, and the local judge confirmed that external investigators might arrive. Miller himself left town in a rush, supposedly to consult with lawyers, leaving his property under the supervision of hired hands. The tension around Samuel Caldwell and his ranch evaporated significantly, as if an oppressive cloud had drifted away. More than once, Adeline caught Josie and Samuel exchanging relieved, almost giddy smiles, even though they both knew the fight wasn't finished. During that time, Adeline discovered another change stirring closer to home. The subtle but deepening bond between her and Samuel Freed. From the immediate worry of losing his water rights, he seemed to relax and she let her guard down too. They shared quiet moments discussing the ranch's future, how they might rotate crops near the creek or expand the vegetable garden. In those conversations, Adeline felt a curious warmth. She realized she wasn't merely passing through this land, she was beginning to love it. One afternoon, as she was laying out bread dough to rise, Samuel came in from the barn dusting off his hands. Rupert and Tobias found a strayed calf, he said, absently pausing when he noticed her flour dusted her cheeks. Strands of hair escaped her pinned-up style. "Everything all right?" she asked, noticing how intensely he was looking. Instead of answering, he reached out and brushed a bit of flour from her chin. "I've been thinking," he said, voice suddenly low, "about what happens next." She swallowed, her heart picking up speed. "I've been thinking about that too," she murmured. They'd never openly declared anything beyond their mutual effort to stand against Harvey. Yet she felt the pull of deeper feelings. His gaze flicked to the quiet hallway that led to Josie's old room. "My sister's heading back to Cheyenne soon. I asked if she was sure, but she said she's done what she came to do. She trusts us to handle the rest." A shy smile tugged at Adeline's lips. "So the ranch will be just you and me again," he nodded, stepping closer. "I want you to stay," he said bluntly, voice tinged with vulnerability. "Not just as an employee, I'd like to build something more. But I also understand if you dream of going back east or finding a bigger town, I won't hold you." The words settled between them, potent with unspoken promises. She pressed her dough-laced hands together to steady herself. "I don't want to run anymore," she whispered. "Not when I found a place that feels like it could be home." They both smiled, and he reached for her hand, carefully mindful of the dough. She let him intertwine his rough fingers with her floury ones. "I've never been good with fancy speeches," he said. "But I care about you, Adeline. I respect you, and I want to share this ranch and my life with you, if that's what you want." Her heart lifted, and she answered in a voice that didn't tremble at all. "It is what I want." As the late afternoon light slanted through the kitchen window, Adeline realized that all the blows of the past weeks had led her to this quietly wondrous moment. Josie didn't even pretend to be surprised when they told her. She simply smirked, saying, "I suspected this might happen." Samuel's never been one to mince words when he cares about someone, and you, Miss Price, have more grit than anyone he's met. Adeline blushed, but it was a happy flush. She'd been bracing for scandalized shock or warnings from Josie. Instead, Josie nodded in approval. "I only have one request," she said, crossing her arms. "Whenever you two make it official, let me witness it. I need to see my brother do something that makes him this content." Samuel chuckled, glancing at Adeline. They'd yet to settle on a specific date or arrangement. "Perhaps it should be soon," he said, turning serious. "I don't want folks believing you're just a housekeeper under my roof anymore. And I think we've proved our partnership in trials already." Adeline's stomach fluttered. "I've never been one for long engagements, to be honest," she said softly. So it was that 2 weeks after the council hearing, they were wed in a simple ceremony at Judge Winter's office. The same judge who had upheld Old Man Whitaker's will. Rupert and Tobias stood as witnesses wearing freshly washed shirts. Josie wore a dress that Adeline had helped tailor. Adeline herself wore a powder blue skirt and blouse that she'd sewn from cloth. Josie brought from Cheyenne, carefully stitching each seam to symbolize her new life. The ceremony was plain with only a few onlookers. Deputy Hayes lingered in the hallway to watch, a small grin on his face. Samuel looked dashing, though obviously not used to dressing up. He stood tall by Adeline's side, his normally calloused hands trembling just a bit. Neither of them repeated the usual flourish of vows. Instead, they exchanged honest promises, words that reflected the short but intense time they'd known each other. "I promise to stand by you," she said, voice steady through storms and dry spells, through struggles and success. Samuel's reply was similarly grounded, acknowledging the reality of ranch life, but also the deep bond they had forged. The moment Judge Winters declared them husband and wife, Adeline's chest filled with an unexpected tenderness. She realized she wasn't merely finding refuge or surviving a grim fate. She was choosing this life, choosing to share it with a man who had looked beyond her poverty and seen her character, a man who had believed she was worthy of trust and responsibility from the very start. Outside, Rupert and Tobias clapped. Josie actually shed a tear, and Deputy Hayes tipped his hat with a chuckle. A few onlookers from Riverbend nodded politely, curiosity evident in their glances. But after the newlyweds stepped off the porch of the judge's office, the small crowd dispersed, returning to their frontier routines. That night back at the ranch, a small celebration ensued under the stars. Josie, Rupert, and Tobias joined them for a simple feast: roast chicken, fresh bread, even a bottle of decent wine that Samuel had quietly procured. Adeline felt a dazzling sense of contentment. The thunderclouds of Harvey Miller's schemes might still lurk somewhere on the horizon, but for now she had a home, a husband, and the sweet taste of hope. When the others retired, she and Samuel lingered at the fence, watching the moon illuminate the fields. The hush of the open land soothed her spirit, each rustle of wind through the grass reminding her of all the possibilities to come. Samuel slid an arm around her waist and she rested her head on his shoulder. "Welcome home, Mrs. Caldwell," he murmured. Adeline closed her eyes, letting the moment settle into her heart. "I've never felt more at home." In the following days and weeks, life on the Caldwell Ranch settled into a comforting rhythm. Adeline rose early to greet each dawn with a sense of purpose and pride. She stitched curtains for the windows, brightening the interior. She worked with the garden until it yielded a bounty of squash, beans, and tomatoes. She reorganized the ledgers, making sure every cent of income and expense was recorded. The ranch hands teased her about her meticulousness, but soon admitted it made their workload smoother. More feed, fewer surprise shortages, better planning for the herd's grazing rotation. Josie stayed for a time long enough to see a letter arrive from Cheyenne, confirming that an investigation into Harvey Miller's land deals was officially underway. Though she didn't say it, Adeline suspected Josie was delighted to deliver that news in person. "He'll wriggle," Josie predicted, waving the letter triumphantly, "but he's cornered now. If he tries to strong-arm the council again, they'll just remind him of these charges." Samuel seemed relieved yet cautious, as if he knew a cornered rattler can still strike. Eventually, Josie said her farewells. She hugged her brother with fierce warmth, then turned to Adeline. "Take care of him and yourself. The West is rough, but you two have something real." Adeline squeezed her hands. "You'll always have a place here if you need it." With that, Josie was gone back to Cheyenne to carve her own path. The ranch felt quieter, but also complete, as though the flux of visitors had settled. Even the local gossip about Adeline being a rejected mail-order bride faded, replaced by remarks about how well the Caldwell Ranch was doing under its new mistress. Adeline and Samuel often spent evenings side by side on the porch, or strolling near the creek that formed the ranch's border. One particular twilight found them wandering hand in hand, a chorus of frogs croaking in the distance. Adeline stopped to watch the reflection of the sky in the water. "Never thought I'd see a place like this, let alone call it home," she said softly. Samuel's voice was equally subdued. "I never imagined sharing it like this. For a long time I figured I'd just keep plugging along by myself." She laced her fingers through his. "I'm glad it didn't turn out that way." His eyes shone with quiet affection. "You bring life here. Remind me of the reasons I wanted this place in the first place, more than just survival." A gentle breeze stirred, carrying the scent of sage and pine. The memory of her first storm-tossed night in the barn felt distant, yet it was etched in her mind forever. That wet, desperate woman with nowhere to go had found more than refuge. She'd found work, friendship, respect, and ultimately love. They walked back to the ranch house, where warm lamplight glowed through the newly hung curtains. As Samuel opened the door, Adeline paused on the threshold, her heart too full for words. So much had changed in the span of weeks. She'd come to Riverbend seeking the security of a mail-order bride arrangement, only to be rejected with callousness for being too poor. But out of that rejection sprang a second chance, a man who valued her capabilities and spirit more than any worldly goods. He had given her space to blossom, and she in turn had found ways to help the ranch flourish. Together they stepped inside, closing the door on dusk and shadows. Outside, the night spread across the sky, full of endless stars, while inside was the promise of a shared life and the contentment of two souls who refused to give up on hope. Adeline Price Caldwell might have arrived with almost nothing, but she had gained an entire future worth everything.